Listening to SENZ, we've got Sumo filling in today for Ian Smith, and if my camera isn't playing tricks on me, I believe we have the CEO of New Zealand Rugby in the studio with you, Scotty.
You know, that's the best thing about we share a similar building with New Zealand Rugby here at SENZ, and Mark Robinson is just bold in the door to say hello, and I thought, well, while we've got him here, we'll have a yarn. Appreciate your time, Mark.
It's great, Sumo. Great to be here, and yeah, nice little impromptu, so happy to chat.
This is very impromptu, and look, I guess we want to start. We started today talking about Super Rugby, and of course another week in which a number of All Black players are going through a compulsory rest period. For a lot of the fans, Mark, as you can probably appreciate, it's a frustration, isn't it? But can you just give us an idea around the overarching philosophy behind these rest periods, why they're important to New Zealand Rugby, and whether or not you think that there is an integrity issue with the competition when this has to be a part of it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question and a really fair one, especially in the context that you mentioned there, Sumo, about working really hard at the moment to put the fan more at the centre of the whole experience around the game and the participant as it relates to community rugby. But we've got an obligation here where we are juggling priorities, aren't we? And all of the research and data we see from our high performance people around load, amount of minutes is suggesting that these guys, the players, need a break around the cycle that we're talking, around that 5-6 game mark. Now, I appreciate there's probably a lot of fans out there that are used to historically seeing players play for, long periods of time, but we feel a real obligation around player welfare, and as I say, all the information is telling us that they need a break occasionally. And I mean, I get it. That's just an issue we've got to keep monitoring, and in a World Cup year especially, that's something that we have to be really conscious of.
I know it's hard because you're an organisation that has to run the shop window, which in terms of rugby is largely international rugby. Super Rugby, though, is such an important part of the ecosystem here. Is there a case for saying we would love to see a little bit more attention on Super Rugby as a standalone competition? Because, again, we discussed this morning this whole notion, and I realised why commercially this is good, but you can't have a discussion about Super Rugby without putting it into the context of All Black rugby. And it feels overwhelming sometimes, and almost like that competition gets pressed down. Is that a fair assessment, or am I oversimplifying a touch?
Oh, look, I think it's a view that, people would share with you, Sumo. I think we're a unique sport in regards to the fact that we are trying to administer and run a club competition, and we have this international obligation as well. I mean, you look at Ireland recently and what's happened in the URC with Leinster resting a number of players and dropping that semi-final over the weekend. They're very similar sort of model to ours in the central contracting and the 4 teams they have and juggling the window. So it's the window of club and international, and so as opposed, we hear often people refer to the NRL or the AFL or the NBA, very different competitions as they relate to having an international game, and we still draw a significant amount of value out of the international game, obviously, and it's something in terms of our teams in black. We work really hard to make that sure they're as successful as possible on the international stage. So that's our context, I guess.
How important is it going to be to, if a Super Rugby Independent Commission is formed and developed, how important is it going to be to get that right, get the personnel right, so that the interests of the fans are looked after, the clubs are looked after, but also so that the interests of the unions themselves are also looked after? Because it feels complicated all the time.
Oh, it's a great point. I mean, we are really clear from a New Zealand standpoint that we see some more dedicated, focused resource around Super Rugby as being really important. Yep. This competition has been a great competition over the years. However, it has sat, as you say, within the construct of sort of national union interests. So we are very keen to see a commission stood up with a governance structure that has a good level of independence to it and fresh eyes around these challenges that have been facing us for some time now about tournament format, the way we package it, the way draws work, the way themes can work, a whole number of things we think can really benefit from some fresh eyes around it. And then, as you say, a management structure sitting within that too that has the right people in it. So in our mind it's critical, but we work in a JV with our friends from Australia, and we are...
How's that going?
Well, overall pretty good. I mean, we're just working through this one with them, and hopefully we'll get there on this, but it's just going to take a bit of time, as all partnerships often do.
Yeah.
Sumo. Yeah.
Just a couple more points, and again, I appreciate you've just wandered in, and this is very impromptu. I had a chat to Dylan Cleaver earlier on, still regarding the ongoing issue around concussion and how the game is developing to make sure that the players are protected. You talked about player welfare in terms of load. It is an ongoing issue for the game. Where do you stand as an organisation now in terms of the research at your disposal and the dialogue that is out there in the market? And this pertains to a particular story this week where we understand that NZR and ACC were in communication around journalist questions. That's a complicated relationship in itself, because I know you pay levels to ACC and I know ACC are a sponsor of yours for your own Head First programs. So where are you at as an organisation when it comes to the issue around concussion and the potential subsequent consequences of those concussions?
Oh, look, we're still, working really hard at it. We believe we have, wonderful people working in this space. I was up in the Northern Hemisphere recently with different meetings across Six Nations, World Rugby, and a lot of the work that we are doing features very prominently there as it goes to research in these areas. We have more resource in-house than most other countries do. We were actually reached out to by a lot of other sports as to the work we're doing. So, this is a constant work on for us. It's very clear it's a massive priority for us. And we'll keep doing that. We're, alongside that research, we are looking at ways, you've seen it in Super Rugby, in which we can change the format of the game to make sure, hopefully over time, there's more speed and tempo in it. That might mean, the nature of the contact has changed over time. At community level, we've already changed or trialling laws to, lower contact and those sorts of things at the moment. So this is an area where, we're taking really seriously, and we'll continue to do so.
Yeah, you've got to get it right too, don't you?
Yeah.
We want kids involved in the game. It's crucial that kids are looking at rugby and saying, I want to play, I want to be a part of it. But then the onus is upon the organisation, isn't it, to make sure that those kids can play in the safest way possible. And I say possible because it is, after all, a contact sport.
Yeah, it is. And, we're, like you, Sumo, we are 100%, committed to as many people having great experiences in our sport as they possibly can. And we think rugby and sport in general is so fundamentally important to what Kiwi kids should grow up with, in terms of not only what happens on the field or pitch or court, but what happens with all the great things they learn through association with sport.
I look at the last couple of years, and it's had its challenges, and we've locked horns occasionally in terms of how you've approached it, how we see from the outside, the work that's been done. Of all the challenges you have faced around All Black coaching issues and coaching appointments, the COVID situation, the relationship with Australia, I mean, I could go on, but I'm just outlining your daily diary probably. What's been the hardest for you? And what's been the biggest lesson you've learned as a CEO through the trying times, through the criticism, and through, I guess, the constant investigation into the organisation?
Oh, look, I think COVID was something that no one was prepared for, were they? In our first year, that was a revenue impact of approximately $60 million. It had a massive impact on people right across our sport. It did impact on relationships, internationally and locally. And that happened right across the world. It happened in the geopolitical sphere, internationally it happened in business, and it certainly happened in sport and in rugby. So, and that brought with it a lot of scrutiny in our world. And we do on a daily basis live with that. So that's not something that, all of a sudden happened. It's just that, the pressure and the unique circumstances, I guess, shone on a brighter light at times. I think the other comment I'd make to that is we are trying to fundamentally transform the game. We believe it can be a game that does reach more people, engage with more people, and be so much more, I guess, enjoyable and a central part to Kiwis' lives. And while you're going on a change journey like that, and you've got some of these things happening, that's been, particularly tricky. And so the thing I've probably reflected on is there's been, more and more opportunity as we work through this for consensus building. Collaboration is really, really important. There were unique circumstances over the last couple of years where that wasn't always possible in certain situations to the extent that, we might have been able to. But nevertheless, we sit here now, and I'm really proud of where rugby sits as a sport Despite some of the observations that you've probably reflected on there, we're seeing Super Rugby, broadcast numbers have a significant jump this year. Social media impressions as high as they've ever been. We've got some work around crowds to do, but we've seen two sellouts in recent weeks, with another one apparently close on Saturday down in Hamilton. The Sevens teams are back, into international competition and going well. Our participation rate's up in teenage levels as well as in heartland areas, and women and girls. We're doing a huge amount of sport around work around the research area to player welfare, like we talked about. So, yeah, it's been tough, but it feels like the world is starting to normalise a little bit again now, and there's some really good things happening now. Now we've got some calmer waters. We're starting to push into a bit.
It's going to be an interesting few months ahead. I know that. It's a results business you're in ultimately. Well, that's part of your business too. What would you say to the fan right now? There are fans who maybe have fallen slightly out of love with the game for one reason or another, who maybe have just felt disconnected as the game has moved far more commercial. What would you say to them?
Oh, look, I'm not sure. We've certainly looked at opportunities to create value across the game. I'm not sure I'd necessarily agree that impacts necessarily negatively on the participant or the fan. We are working really hard, as I said before, to try and put the fan and the participant more at the middle of anything we do, which is a big shift. I think historically, the sport has relied on, look, we're rugby, we're the national game, you should sort of find a way to support us.
Yeah, 100%.
And we acknowledge that we need to change that model. So you talked about secondary school rugby before, the different law changes there, formats of competitions, our coaching, our officiating, it's all part of that player experience, which is really important. As it relates to the fan, the shape of the game, dare I say it, that word product, in terms of what they want that to modify and be more entertaining, have more spectacular highlights in it, and we understand that, and we're trying to move towards that. I think we have worked hard to grow value across the game, but that's simply so we can reinvest into more areas to hopefully grow and foster it at all levels. We want to see more kids, boys and girls, playing the game at a junior age. We want greater experiences right through our pathway, through to our high performance areas where we want winning teams. So we think that reinvestment model is really important and committed to making a difference in all those areas as we can.
Could spend hours chatting to you, as you know. Thank you. This has been bonus time for us. You're just wandering into the studio. So I really appreciate you sitting down and answering a few questions for us, mate. I'm sure there'll be plenty of text replies on the line as well.
I'm sure there will be. Thanks.
New Zealand Rugby CEO Mark Robinson, thanks so much.